Get in the know. Non-stop Vikings talk. It's Purple Daily on Score North and ScoreNorth.com.
It was a really cool process, how we set it up, allow our players to vote the guys that are going to wear the C's on their jerseys. First and foremost, on the offensive side of the ball, Kirk Cousins. He missed one vote out of our entire football team, and that was on his own ballot. So I think it's...
There he is, Kevin O'Connell, talking about the way the team views Captain Kirk. That Kirk Cousins, how do you see, you call us Cousins haters. Cousins doesn't even have enough belief in himself to vote himself captain. You may call it being humble. Judd may call it questioning yourself.
Selfless. Sure. That's just selfless. It's just great to see. So happy to see that a process that has 8 captains, I think, per team played out like that.
The opposite of selfless would be what Declan's doing right now, which is dodging out to North Carolina to visit family right before wave 2 of this snowstorm. I feel like we're behind pace here, by the way. Weren't we supposed to get like a foot of snow overnight? I feel like we're pacing behind the record that they have been talking about.
I saw a tweet this morning that said, not to disappoint you all, but we're talking more like probably 14 now.
See, that's kind of, by the way, AJ Fredrickson in for Declan today. Aren't you guys were you guys a little disappointed when you saw, that's not going to be like 3 feet of snow?
No.
If we're going to let's just go for it. They hyped it up all week.
Just, you know what? Just wait until you can tell me, like officially, like this whole thing of, the forecast or the, what's it called? The advanced stuff that starts to come in. Like it started last week. Like
the models
this could be epic. Yeah, the models. Thank you. Until you know what you're talking about, come on. Like there's such a vast difference, in my opinion, between like 20 plus and 14 in the state. I want more certainty.
But even last night they were saying it was going to be like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'm kind of lumping all the weather guys into one here and the weather women. I don't know. Maybe there was a couple that were saying, hey, this is totally not going to be that bad. But I thought about sending something pithy out on Twitter today, just kind of dunking on the meteorologists who were wrong. But then I realized I hit 262 and write that down on Mackey and Judd in 2022. So if I'm only hitting on like 1 in 4 sports predictions, probably can't dunk on weathermen.
What if you came along and sold yourself as the weatherman or woman who didn't panic ever?
Like when everyone else once in a while, yeah.
Like when everyone else is like, this is going to be unbelievable. 20 inches are in. You're like, you know what? Calm down. We don't know that.
It's going to snow a little bit. It might snow a lot. Either way, you're going to be fine. Kids should go to school. It's going to be fine. Don't worry.
Exactly right.
We live in Minnesota. Right. It's going to be fine.
Well, and the worst part now is, as Dawn said yesterday or last night, and she's right. Snow days are a thing of the past now. Post pandemic, they just go virtual.
Yeah, you don't get to take the whole day off and just watch like Nickelodeon. That was the best. Oh my gosh.
In my day, it was like Happy Days reruns, Laverne and Shirley. But yeah, like the whole thing now is it's like, okay, we're going virtual learning. No, it's a snow day. No learning.
I know it's these kids. They'll never understand the excitement of watching your school scroll by. It took like a half hour for all the alphabetized schools to scroll by. By the way, this is Purple Daily. Yeah. Where we talk Vikings every single day, daily Vikings entertainment. We just want the Vikings to win a Super Bowl before we die. And the show is presented in part by our friends at TCL, now an official partner of the NFL, one of the world's best-selling consumer electronics brands. They have a new lineup of award-winning TVs delivering the most entertainment with stunning resolution at an affordable cost. Enjoy more of the things you love with TCL and learn more at TCL.com. So yesterday, we gave you a bonus episode sort of talking about what Kevin O'Connell is good at, what he could get better at, just sort of our one-year thoughts on Kevin O'Connell. Let's do the same thing here for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. After year 1, it's the first time he's ever been a general manager in the NFL with the Vikings last year. We'll give you on a second episode of Purple Daily, we'll give you write that down predictions and an accountability session today. But let's just start out with and we'll get into some specific questions here too, but Judd, what are your overall thoughts now that you've been able to observe a full year of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah in the captain's seat?
So I think unlike O'Connell, and with O'Connell, there are incompletes. So don't get me wrong here. I think with Kwesi, there's more incompletes because the prime one to me is, and I've actually been trying to look at this more and more in recent days, his first draft. His first draft doesn't look good right now. But the more I thought about it and went back through it, that could change. Like this draft might be terrible. I have no clue.
Mhm.
But the reality is we are, and we talked about this with Thor on our Tuesday show, which of course focuses on the draft. And we all agreed, we are so eager now to paint something as good or bad immediately. So like draft class, bust. That's just a bust. Scene stinks, blah, blah, blah. And that all might be accurate, but we don't know that. So I think a lot of people are like, well, he had a terrible draft. That's a D. And I'm like, okay, that might be true. But Ed Donatel, who I think O'Connell hired probably more than Kwesi, didn't develop players either. So now that Brian Flores is going to come in and be far more of a teacher, is he going to develop Scene Asamoah? I mean, he probably will. He'll certainly take a shot at that. So I think Kwesi, just as a starting off point, gets a little bit more leeway than O'Connell because there's more unknowns with what he's done. The thing that obviously, Phil, stands out as like the A move, the TJ Hawkinson in-season trade,
Yes,
was absolutely huge because as I've said before, and I'll stand by this team does not win 13 games without that trade. If that trade does not get made, they probably win 10 games, 11 games perhaps, but they don't get up to 13. And I mean, hell, I think his first game was the Washington game, which he played a huge role in. So like there's this whole thing about, well, I mean, if you're not with a team in training camp, you're never going to be able to help a team in season, right? TJ Hawkinson stepped into Washington and played an enormous role. And so I think if there was one move that really stood out to me as just okay, this is an impressive. It's not a gamble, but it is an interesting ad in season, which we don't see a lot in this league necessarily across the board. That's the thing that I think he gets the most credit for, was getting a division rival to trade a really good player who might be good for the long term too.
Yeah,
not just 2022. And so that's the one that stands out to me as being like the A move. The rest of it, I think, is a lot of wait and see, including down to he and O'Connell, to go to our conversation on Tuesday, Phil, he and O'Connell eventually are going to be judged in a huge way on the quarterback. And it's probably not going to be Kirk. So I'm just saying, I think Kwesi gets a lot more leeway in his grade until we start to see roster construction come along. And right now, I think it's just sort of at the beginning of what his plan is.
it's also hard to evaluate Kwesi because we had heard so many rumblings a year ago that the Wilfs had a set, I guess, I don't know if edict is the right word, or the Wilfs really didn't want to go extreme. They wanted a coach and a general manager that were willing to work with Kirk Cousins unless an incredible trade came across their desk. They let Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman go with the thought that the sum of these parts isn't equaling enough. And then if we can bring in new leadership from the front office on down to the coaching staff, that they can take a very similar group of players and go further. And they did, compared to the last couple of years anyways. They won 13 games and they went to the playoffs. Now they got beat at home by probably the worst team in the NFC bracket, the Giants. So just like judging, it's the same thought that I had yesterday on O'Connell. Just judging in a vacuum of, can you elevate what Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman couldn't? And the answer was, at least for 1 year, yes. But now the question becomes, okay, what does this thing look like for the long haul? What's your 3-year plan? What's your 5-year plan? And so the different categories you would grade a general manager in are your free agent signings, your draft picks, the trades that you make, but then there's also the hires that you make. And Kwesi was clearly very heavily involved, along with the Wilfs, in hiring Kevin O'Connell. Although there were some rumblings we had heard credibly behind the scenes that maybe Kwesi's number one choice was actually Jim Harbaugh. It's very interesting.
Yes.
Not that he didn't want Kevin O'Connell. Maybe it was like a 1A and a 1B, but that Kwesi was, going back to his San Francisco days, very much a Jim Harbaugh guy. So I think if you start to parse apart, okay, how did he do in the measurable categories? But then there's also like these immeasurable things like culture setting and just can you do the things day to day, making players comfortable, like these things that you don't really see on a draft board or in a free agent, retrospective grade. Mm-hmm. The draft is a huge question mark. I see what he was trying to do, but it needs to start to come to fruition pretty much immediately in week 1. Lewis Seen, Andrew Booth, Ed Ingram, Brian Asamoah, those are the 4 players you drafted in the first 3 rounds, and you traded back to accumulate capital to draft Seen and to draft those players, right? Those guys basically gave you nothing. Ed Ingram was the only one that played regularly last year, not counting special teams, and he was one of the worst guards in the NFL.
Right.
So I think you can give him a 1-year grace period. Hey, man, some injury, bad luck. Maybe the coordinator fit wasn't right to leverage Asamoah and some of the speed here. Caleb Evans, I would throw into the mix too as a guy that they drafted because they clearly he wanted speed, athleticism, youth, right? Asamoah, Caleb Evans, Andrew Booth, Lewis Seen. I totally get it. But that needs to start to come to fruition week 1, week 2, week 3. On the free agent signings, very interesting group here. So he re-signed Patrick Peterson, who had maybe the best season since like 2018, I want to say. So I would say bringing Patrick Peterson back within that system, as much as that system was kind of a disaster, worked really well. Harrison Phillips was a good, solid interior defensive lineman last season. Other than that, here are the rest of the free agents. The Kwesi ultimately, and there's scouts and there's other people that make these decisions, and your cap situation leads you to the bargain bin. So I get it. Like, there's some things that were sort of hamstringing the Vikings, but Zadarius Smith I would put in the win category too. Zadarius Smith for the first 9 weeks of the season was excellent. Jesse Davis was brought in to maybe be a starting right guard or at least be a depth guy. Was he just like on the practice? Like, what happened to Jesse Davis? I don't even remember.
He was traded to Pittsburgh, right?
Before the season. They just, okay. They just said goodbye.
At the end of camp, they traded him for a draft pick to Pittsburgh.
Johnny Munt.
KOC's guy. Mm-hmm. KOC's guy. Judd's guy.
Maybe he helped teach the system to some guys, I'm sure. But he's one of the lowest graded players on the roster, according to PFF.
He did some things here and there. PFF is flawed at times.
Jordan Hicks.
Yep. Yeah, that was not. I mean, that was a veteran type of.
But you already had a veteran. Like, and I get it. I get that you aren't necessarily. You signed him before you drafted Asamoah, so I get it. But
right, and this is the fault of a lot of people, but you do wonder how much they got guys that Donatel said would fit his system, only to realize his system was not really flexible and not good.
Yeah.
And that's a Kwesi and O'Connell problem too. I'm not absolving them. I'm just saying that a lot of people were stifled, I think. Mm-hmm. A lot of young players were stifled.
Austin Schlottman and Chris Reed as just sort of depth offensive linemen.
Yep.
Kind of in the same bin as Jesse Davis.
Yep.
They both wound up having to patchwork start for a month and a half at center. So I don't think there's nothing bad about those signings. You need the Schlottmans and the Reeds to just sort of fill out your offensive line. So those are just decent. The 3 cornerbacks he signed in free agency were Chandon Sullivan to be your starting slot corner, and then depth guys Nate Hairston and Ty Smith. Mm-hmm. Didn't really do a whole lot there. He also traded draft capital for Jalen Reagor and Justin Blacklock, the defensive lineman,
from
who
the
really
Texans.
Didn't do a whole lot.
Yeah, and I think he got hurt. Now, the free agent thing is an interesting one, because if we are to assume that indeed the Wilfs sort of mandated everyone come back, Eric Kendricks is coming back. Patrick Peterson, let's bring him back. Let's not release guys. Your free agency options were basically, and this might be the case again, limited to probably one decent signing. Harrison Phillips was, I think, considered a pretty big one. I mean, Patrick Peterson's contract was a year deal and not that big a deal. So I do think that the mandate working with what he was allowed to work with too, which is why I didn't agree with it. Now they won 13 games. I would judge him more on the draft. And all I'm trying to say is I'm not absolving him. In fact, I don't even agree with the process. I don't love trading back. I think he will again now, but I don't love it. But I do think that the draft you can grade him on. I just think we need to give it more time. I would like to see Lewis Seen and Asamoah and the cornerbacks, if they can stay on the field, which is an if. I would like to see them coached up correctly. And I'm pretty sure that they, on the DC, whiffed really badly. So that's all I'm saying is when you get to training camp day one and Lewis Seen has just been buried, something's up with that. Like, you don't take a guy in the first round, a safety. Like, that's not a position where, oh my God, this guy can't play for 3 years. We got to coach him up.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to say, in Kwesi's case, I think that there's more incompletes. It doesn't mean that I'm impressed. It also doesn't mean that I think that we can completely pass judgment yet, because there are guys from this draft class that could develop.
You know, so as a guy who's been big into baseball analytics throughout my adult life, Moneyball was one of the first books I read cover to cover, I feel like 20 years ago, documenting Billy Beane trying to turn the Oakland A's around after losing, Jason Giambi and Miguel Tejada. And I think sometimes what happens with analytically forward front offices, and that's what the Vikings are very much now, right? I mean, Kwesi is treating roster, personnel, draft, free agency, everything like commodities, stock trading. That's the background that he comes from. And I love that, because I think you do have to have that sort of removed objective viewpoint when it comes to, I mean, this is a chessboard, and you're trying to figure out, you have to take the emotion out of it. And that's the way he approaches it. And I like that. But sometimes you can get caught up in trying to find the hidden gem all the time or do the tricky thing. And I didn't hate the first round trade, but I think if you just sort of rewind it, what pick did they have? Weren't they drafting like was it 14th last year? 14th or 15th or something?
No, I thought it was between 12 and 14.
So 12 or 14.
Yeah.
They had a top 15 pick. Yep. The mental gymnastics it takes to move back 20 picks. And yeah, you picked up another pick. You thought that, rounds 2, 3, and 4 were kind of flat in terms of talent. Mm-hmm. But you're telling me that there's not 12 or 15 sort of franchise-changing type players, right, and the Ravens may have gotten one, the Notre Dame safety, right, and you wind up drafting a safety. Anyways, I think my biggest worry, I like the way that he approaches it. I think in general, if you can have more picks in the first 4 rounds, you're going to give yourself more of a shot to build out a roster. But you also need top-end talent. And so I don't want him to get too tricky with some of these personnel moves. I don't want him to be looking at Jalen Reagor and saying, boy, 2 years ago, that commodity, that stock was up here. He was the 20th overall pick or whatever he was.
Right.
The whole league viewed him as a first-round talent. Now that stock has fallen, and so we should buy low on that stock so we can ride it back up. And the reality is sometimes in the NFL, Laquan Treadwell, Jalen Reagor, there's just dudes that the stock's never going to go back up. So, did that trade, they have a punt returner now. But I think they thought Reagor was going to be more than just a punt returner when they made that trade. So stuff like that where, yeah, you're buying low on a stock, but are you, is it really going to go up? I don't want him to be so caught up in this value world that he's giving away draft picks for guys that are never going to amount to anything.
So that was pick 12.
There you go. They moved back 20 picks.
Yeah. Yep. And what I don't like too is this. Now, it's why I was actually impressed with the Hawkinson trade. But in the same breath, they made that draft night trade with a division rival and gave them a potentially explosive receiver to take instead of them jumping on that pick. And I understand that they think that that's smart, but that's what sort of stopped me as far as it's not just that you traded the pick. You traded it to a team that you have to play twice a year for a long time. And this guy could, he caught a touchdown pass in Detroit against the Vikings. And so that's where I think that you have to be careful there. But in the same breath, then the Hawkinson trade, I absolutely loved. It was a second round pick, but it was a second round pick for a tight end who you can sign long-term now, who again can come back and haunt Detroit and actually be the exact type of tight end that you've been trying to find for a few years. So in both ways, he did things that I approve of. It's just that once it was backwards and once it was the right move. But if I had to give him a grade, and it's not incomplete, I would probably give him, because of the draft, like what we know today, because of the draft and because of how he was sort of hamstrung with what he could do, I'd give him personnel-wise a C+ right now.
That's fair.
I'd give him a C+.
It's hard to give him anything close to an A, right? Because the draft is at best unknown.
Correct. And that's where I'm trying to be fair.
Mm-hmm. And the trades, he hit on one of the trades.
Yeah.
But he probably whiffed. I think I don't know. I don't know if he whiffed on the Rager trade. They have a good punt returner, but is he a good punt returner? He muffs punts. Like they have a punt returner.
In the playoff game. He's muffed 3 punts in the past 2 playoff games. 2 against Tampa Bay with Philadelphia, and he muffed 1 against the Giants. He can't
play in the offense. They literally they didn't give him snaps. He had a couple explosive plays, but he also had a couple wrong routes that led to interceptions and
now you're on a draft pick that could have been capital for you. So that's where and look, if the Wilfs indeed said part of why we want to hire you is because we feel that we can really run this roster back and that it's far superior to what Spielman and Zimmer got from it previously, and Kwesi said, okay, well, for now, that's his roster. So I can't just absolve him completely and be like, well, it probably came from the Wilfs, so it's not him. So I think a C+ is fair right now for him.
Yeah. Before we get to this mock, I want AJ, you're a huge Vikings fan, and you can find AJ. AJ does all kinds of things for us at Score North and 1500 ESPN. You can find him every once in a while on the Taxi Squad podcast. What are your general thoughts? We did the KOC thing yesterday. Give us just your general thoughts from a fan perspective on the first year of Kwesi and KOC. Where are you at?
In terms of Kwesi, just staying on the topic, I've been pleased. I think the draft left a lot to be desired just because it's so early, I think, to pan out, especially with a lot of the speed bumps that maybe were affected by that draft. But in terms of what I saw other than that, the ability to take a stab and go out and get that big guy in TJ Hawkinson, like you mentioned earlier, they don't win some of those games without him. So you're going to have to need a guy like that. Now you can sign him for longer. The Brian Flores hiring, I think, is fantastic because that tells not only is he good with maybe some of the logistics and the football knowledge, but he's also a salesman because it's hard to take or make a guy feel like that gut feeling of turning down a head coaching position to come and be a defensive coordinator. You've established that you have a plan for this team, a future for this team, and then it's better for that guy to take a lesser position to come and join you among your ranks and try to maybe better his career in that sense. So I like Kwesi. Obviously, the draft does halter that first year. I think you're spot on. Maybe I'm a little more positive about him. I would say maybe a B- rather than a C+.
The Flores thing, I hadn't that's another interesting angle in that there was a ton of people saw Kwesi and Flores yucking it up at the Senior Bowl. Mm-hmm. Kwesi is a relationship builder. I kind of like the stuff that he said publicly before, the USA Today article. Some of the things he kind of ripped the Rams a little bit, even though with the going full Rams worked for the Rams. I like that he sort of laid out his thoughts in his own Kwesi way, and then he just shut it down. He basically stopped doing media after that. But you probably don't land Brian Flores with the condition of your personnel if you're not a great relationship builder and you're not a great salesman. Not from a sleazy salesman perspective, not anyone is going to bring Brian Flores in and be like, you want to work with the second worst defense in the league and a bunch of 30-year-olds or a bunch of rookies or second-year guys who've never played? Come on down. So he must have done a hell of a job in KOC selling that job, Judd.
Yes, and I think, too, the fact that Flores went through his experience with the Dolphins, which was definitely a very bad one. I think Brian Flores is at the point in his life where he says, you know what, I'm probably going to get a head coaching job again. Do I really want it to be with Kyler Murray and a very dysfunctional Cardinals franchise, which for the most part, they are dysfunctional. So I think it was also helpful to the Vikings that Brian Flores probably thought, I just work for a complete Looney Tune with the Dolphins, right?
Yeah.
I sort of got fired for no good, like there was no good cause to fire him. He had done a pretty good job. I think the last 2 teams finished above 500. And so I think Brian Flores probably said, you know what? The Vikings, and Phil, we've talked about this a lot. The Vikings, if nothing else, their defense might have sucked, but they have stability. This is an attractive place to work.
I agree.
If you go through a lot of franchises and look at, dysfunction up top. The Vikings have their flaws for sure, but I don't think you look at them and ever think dysfunctional.
Yeah, I agree. They've been dysfunctional in spurts at times
Yeah.
under the Wilf leadership. I mean, didn't Love Boat happen right when they bought the team?
Yes, 05.
And then I would say 2010 was full of dysfunction with Moss.
Right.
And
But it's
Carr,
not a long-standing, but like the Wilfs aren't
They
dysfunctional.
extinguish it. They extinguish dysfunction and stop
Right.
it in its tracks.
Like you never look. I think that you feel bad for the Vikings. I don't think you ever look at them and think, what a joke.
Yeah,
You know,
I agree with that.
what a complete joke. And so I do think that, especially now, this is an attractive place to work. And you know what? In Kirk's defense, too, like there's a lot of quarterbacks who you're like, ooh, what's that guy about? Like Kirk is quirky and weird, but Kirk is not a guy I don't think that anyone looks at and says, oh my God, Kirk Cousins wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot ball.
Yeah, I think like the issue with Kirk isn't like, is he going to get arrested or
Right.
is he going to play video games when he should be
Does he have a
studying
clause?
film?
Does he have a clause in
Yeah.
his contract where you basically reward him and say you have to watch film?
Yeah. The issue with Kirk is, as we've talked about a couple times here and there on Purple Daily, is he good enough at the money that he makes for you to build out a roster that can win big, not just get to the playoffs? We should talk about that sometime on the show.
We never
that's
talk
a
about it.
topic worth exploring in
We
depth.
never talk about Kirk. Kirk free week.
All right, let's get to a really interesting mock here in our mock draft roundup, which every week we give you a handful of mocks, both on Purple Daily and Mackie and Judd. We are, and your guy Tyler Fornes at Vikings Wire is doing even more. He's literally going through every mock that's ever been mocked and putting together a spreadsheet and a database of who has the Vikings going where. It's mostly cornerbacks. We've done about 16, 17 of these mock drafts. A handful of wide receiver picks, but it's largely cornerbacks that the mockosphere has going to the Vikings. Daniel Jeremiah, friend of the show. We should get him on again sometime.
He's very good. Yes.
He's got a 2.0 out today.
A lot of respect for him.
He's not projecting trades in a mock draft this early in the offseason, but he will at some point, he says. It's too early to unleash the trades.
Okay,
right
I'm
now.
not. No. Come on, Danny. Do it.
You coward.
Do the trades now,
DJ,
Danny.
you sissy, you coward. He's got the Chicago Bears taking Jalen Carter, number 1. He's got the Texans taking Bryce Young. Cardinals taking Tyree Wilson. CJ Stroud to the Colts at 4.
Yep.
Will Anderson Jr. to the Seahawks at 5. I'm going to skip around here. Will Levis to the Raiders at 7. Interesting. First cornerback off the board. 10th to the Eagles, Devin Witherspoon.
Thor's guy.
Jordan Addison, the first receiver off the board of the Texans at 12. Still no fourth quarterback here. Patriots take the second cornerback, Christian Gonzalez at 14. Packers take a tight end, but not the Notre Dame guy. They take the Utah tight end, Dalton Kincaid at 15.
Interesting.
See, I think DJ always has some sources too. Like his mocks are
Well-
always a little different and probably more realistic when you line them up.
Yep. And keep in mind, too, it's the last pre-combine mock. Next week will change the world. The
Yes.
football world. In a world where everything could change because of what happens in Indianapolis.
Joey Porter Jr., the next cornerback off the board of the Commanders at 16. We're skipping here. Anthony Richardson to the Lions at 18.
Ooh. Okay, I don't think that happens, but
Super interesting. And if Anthony Richardson falls and the Vikings like him, if he falls like into the mid-teens and the Vikings like him, I could see them swinging something.
okay.
Bijan Robinson to the Buccaneers at 19. Jackson Smith and the Jigba to the Seahawks at 20. Let's get there's Quentin Johnston, so there's a receiver run here. And at 23, according to Daniel Jeremiah, Minnesota Vikings select cornerback out of Maryland, Deonte Banks.
Big
Banks
Ben.
has good size. I think you'll see his stock rise as the evaluation process unfolds.
Yep.
This cornerback is physical and tough. So Deonte Banks. Interesting. The Athletic had him going as well to the Vikings a couple weeks ago.
So I
Thoughts?
kid, but I don't kid. Next week is huge because it does start the process of boards being at least altered fairly significantly, right? Because you'll have the workouts. Now you have to combine that in today's day and age of scouting with the with the personal workouts that take place on college campuses. Because I'm not sure how many of these 4 quarterbacks are actually going to throw. It might be, for all I know at this point, 0.
Yeah.
But I think the Richardson one, between his pro day and the combine, I think that's really going to indicate if he, let's say, could go 16 or 17, or if he goes top 10.
Yeah. So interesting. I think Richardson's the type of guy, especially if he doesn't throw at the combine, the less he can throw, because the throwing is the thing that they're going to pick apart. But it's also the thing that the teams feel like they can maybe fix, like Josh Allen. If he does everything but the throwing, his stock will probably rise, I would think, because he's just going to show out athletically.
How much does Josh Allen, in your mind, change the thought process about this too? Because, I go back to the Ponder draft, which was the same type of draft. It had 4 or 5 potential first-round quarterbacks. And that's the one where going into that year, like going into the previous season, I think in most mocks, Jake Locker was mocked the top pick.
Right.
But then there were concerns about accuracy, which got worse and worse. And by the time the draft came around, I think he went something like 8 to the Titans. And that was a concern throughout a career in which he was not successful. Josh Allen, same sort of concerns, right? And he came into the league inaccurate.
Yes.
And I don't know they completely fixed it, but it certainly got fixed to a large degree. How much do you think Richardson's stock will be altered by that story?
So I'm going to answer this in kind of I do think it helps Richardson, but this is where I actually love the way Kwesi thinks about stocks and commodities. And I think this is where a lot of media and fans get it wrong. They think about quarterbacks as you're either going to be a bust or not. It's like a very black and white way of viewing it, right? Christian Ponder was a bust. Well, yes. The bigger crime with Christian Ponder is that his upside was also capped. He wasn't a big time leader. He wasn't a big time college quarterback. He was a solid college quarterback. He was a safe pick. He was like Mitch Trubisky, basically, where, okay, if he pans out, he can just be a good, solid quarterback for you.
Yep.
But there was no chance of a Christian Ponder, or even, quite frankly, a Teddy Bridgewater, just based on his arm limitations, ever being like a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. So you were trying to find a young quarterback on a rookie deal that could run your offense and be a starter. But with both those picks, they weren't. When the Vikings drafted Dante Culpepper, there were a lot of questions about, okay, the competition he faced, to what extent can he read defenses, et cetera. He got to sit behind, I guess it was it Cunningham? Cunningham and Jeff George he sat behind in 1999.
Right.
But if they could, get him to where he needed to be, he had a chance with his upside to be a top 5 quarterback, and he was for like a couple years.
That's what Denny saw. You're right.
If I told you with Anthony Richardson, okay, there is a 50% chance that this dude is a total bust, like flames out in 2 or 3 years and is just a bounce around backup, 50% chance. But there's a 30% chance he's a star, like a Josh Allen, game-changing, franchise-changing star. Mm-hmm. And a 20% chance he's somewhere in between, where he's playable, he's a good, solid quarterback, but like he's a Daniel Jones with a bigger arm and more athleticism, but a guy that you might not want to pay $40 million to on the second contract. Would you swallow the 50% risk that he's a bust for the 30% chance that he could change your entire franchise on a rookie contract for 5 years? That's how they think. That's how Kwesi thinks about this.
And so to add to that, because I completely agree with the scenario you just painted, the most important thing is this. And it's not you pride yourself on this. It's an actual step back, and you have to ask yourself this question. How well does your room read the person? Because to your Ponder point, if Christian Ponder, who is incredibly book smart, but if you had sat down with Ponder, Phil, for a day, I think you would have come away and said, nice guy, very, very intelligent, not really an alpha, though.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was very clear. And so I think that I think what you get into here, and teams try and pride themselves on this, but I think a lot fall woefully short, and we don't know this, Anthony Richardson's character. And what is he like? And this is where you have to talk to people. And this is where, who was the receiver? Was it Blackman? There was a receiver.
Justin
yes,
Blackman.
Who some team put a former FBI tail on, an agent, to go and watch what he did and watch who he interacted with. And he found out that he would go to bars and drink, and they're like, okay, that's it. We're done. This is so I guess I would take that chance if my correspondence on Richardson came back with this guy wants to be great.
Yeah.
If it comes back with nice guy, real nice guy, I'd be like, okay, that's great. He can go be a nice guy at his house.
Yep. No, it's and again, if there's another quarterback out there that has a 50 to 60% chance of being a solid guy that can just kind of man the franchise, but a 10% chance of ever actually being like Kenny Pickett. Is Kenny Pickett ever going to be a franchise-changing quarterback? You know, probably not. I am more interested if the Vikings are going to move off Cousins in the next 2 years. I am interested in a franchise-changing shot, even if it's not like a 90% chance of panning out. Take a gamble.
My opinion of athletes is this: mechanics can be worked with and changed. Personalities cannot.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You're not going to change a person's fundamental brain chemistry and makeup.
Yep. Amen. A shout out to our friends, by the way, at Federated Mutual Insurance Company. They're not going to necessarily come in and change the DNA of your business, but they can definitely help maximize the level of success that your business experiences through risk management tools and resources. They've been around for over 100 years. It's like having a great offensive line, protecting your business, a great guiding hand with all sorts of experience. Find out more at federatedinsurance.com, where it's our business to protect yours. Thanks for AJ filling in for Declan here the rest of the week. I do believe Declan was texting me from the airport. My wife is flying out of town as well for a business trip. People are flying out of the airport today. I don't know if they're ever going to come back, though, based on what they're telling us.
They are leaving,
next couple days.
He sure does know how to pick his days off.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the last time I filled him for couple days. It was the NFL free agency week, just out of nowhere.
Yeah, we told him don't take that week off.
That was a really bad idea.
Yeah.
And like he always
was there a blizzard that week too?
No, that was like springtime or summertime.
No, but the problem with Dex is he books his flights and then looks at schedules.
Yeah.
I like sports. It's like, no.
Oh, sorry. The Vikings and Packers are playing on a Monday, but I'm going to be in Vegas getting drunk. See you guys on Tuesday. All right, that's a wrap. Purple Daily, a little bonus episode for you guys today. Be sure to check out the Write That Down episodes on Mackie and Judd and Purple Daily. We'll see you tomorrow.